Did you know there is not just one Sirian race? When most people hear the word Sirian, they picture a single type of alien being from the star Sirius. Maybe something humanoid, maybe blue-skinned, standing tall, very wise. And yes, that being does exist. But what the channeled records tell us is that Sirian is actually more like a family name, a broad category. Under that one label, you find 4 completely different types of beings, each one with its own appearance, its own culture, its own special role in the story of life in this galaxy. 4 races, 1 star system, and all of them, according to the sources we are going to explore today, have had a deep and long-standing connection with planet Earth and with human beings for a very, very long time. So today, we are going to meet all 4 of them. We are going to find out what they look like, how they live, what they care about, and what they are actually here to do. And at the end, we are going to talk about something that a growing number of people in the contact research and channeling community believe is coming. A moment in the not-too-distant future when human beings and extraterrestrial beings meet openly for the first time in recorded history. And we will ask the question, could the Sirians be among the first groups to step forward? We have a lot to cover, so let us start with the group that is probably the most unexpected of the 4. Part 1. The Aquatic Sirians. Imagine a being that is fully humanoid. 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, a face you could recognize. But then you notice the webbing between the fingers and toes. And then you notice additional webbed appendages running along the arms and the sides of the body, a little like fins. And you realize that this is a being that is just as comfortable moving through deep water as it is walking on land. These are the Aquatic Sirians, and they are one of the most fascinating groups in all of the extraterrestrial contact literature. In the channeled materials that describe them, the Aquatic Sirians are tall and strongly built. The males are described as averaging around 2 meters in height, which puts them roughly in the range of a very tall human. The females are slightly shorter. Their skin tends toward cool tones, often with a slightly bluish or gray-green quality, which makes sense for beings who spend a great deal of time in water. Their eyes are large and adapted for underwater vision, and they are described as being almost entirely telepathic in the way they communicate. Speech, as we know it, is not really their primary mode of connection. Now, one thing the channeled sources are very careful to make clear is that the Aquatic Sirians are not the fish people you might be imagining from old mythology or science fiction. They are not half fish. They are fully mammalian and fully humanoid in their basic body structure. The aquatic adaptations are additions to the human-style form, not replacements for it. Think of it less like a mermaid and more like a diver whose body has been perfectly engineered for the ocean over a very long evolutionary history. Their home is described as a water-rich planet in the Sirius A star system. Their entire civilization has grown up around water. Their architecture, their communication networks, their sense of community, all of it is shaped by the ocean environment. What is their personality like? The channeled sources, particularly those gathered through the extensive work of Lissa Royal and the body of material associated with letters from Sirius, describe the Aquatic Sirians as deeply relational beings. Community matters enormously to them. The idea of an individual isolated from their group would be genuinely distressing to an Aquatic Sirian in a way that is hard for humans to fully imagine. Their telepathy reinforces this, because there is very little separation between self and community when you can feel each other's thoughts and emotions in real time. They are also described as a highly creative species. Their cultural life is rich in what we might call resonance arts, forms of expression that work through frequency, vibration, and shared feeling rather than visual images or spoken words. If you imagine music that you do not just hear but actually feel throughout your whole body and your emotional field, you are getting close to the kind of art the aquatic Sirians create and share with each other. Now, here is where their story connects directly to Earth. The aquatic Sirians are described in multiple channeled sources as being involved in what is called a hybridization program. This is the idea that certain extraterrestrial groups have, over very long periods of time, worked to blend their genetics with other species, including humans, as part of a broader project of expanding consciousness across the galaxy. The aquatic Sirians' contribution to this program is said to have a particular focus on water and on the beings that live in Earth's oceans. And this brings us to one of the most repeated themes in all of the Sirian channeling literature: the deep connection between the Sirians and Earth's cetaceans, meaning dolphins and whales. Multiple channeled sources describe dolphins in particular as carrying what they call Sirian energy within Earth's biosphere. The idea is that dolphins function as a kind of living bridge, holding a frequency that is connected to the Sirian consciousness field and anchoring it within our planet's water systems. In one transcript from Lissa Royal's material, dolphin beings are described as having acted as planetary liaisons for millennia, working not just as animals, but as conscious participants in Earth's energetic maintenance. Another source, focused on sperm whales specifically, goes even further, framing whales as living memory banks for ancient knowledge. The suggestion is that whales carry encoded information from very early periods in Earth's history, and that their song is not just communication, but a form of data preservation. Now, here is something honest that the best research in this area flags directly. There is actually a split in the channeled sources on the exact nature of the cetacean connection. One source says clearly that dolphins and whales did not come from somewhere else, that they evolved on Earth with some assistance. Another source, drawing on Andromedan channeling hosted through the same Sirian network, says that many water mammals, including whales, came from Andromedan planets, while dolphins specifically originated from a Sirius A world. The way to hold these two ideas together, rather than forcing one to be right and one to be wrong, is to think about what seeding might mean in this context. If the Sirian connection to cetaceans is primarily about consciousness, about these beings choosing to carry a certain frequency into Earth's oceans, then the question of whether they physically arrived from Sirius or evolved on Earth becomes a secondary question. The function is the same. They are here, they carry the energy, and the Sirians consider them kin. That sense of kinship with Earth's water beings is one of the defining characteristics of the aquatic Sirians, and it gives them a very specific reason to care deeply about what happens on this planet. For them, Earth's oceans are not just a biome. They are home to a community they are deeply bonded with. Part 2. The Blue Sirians. If the aquatic Sirians are the most unexpected of the four Sirian groups, the Blue Sirians are probably the most visually striking. And they are, in many channeling traditions, the group that comes closest to what people imagine when they hear the word Sirian. These are tall beings, very tall. The channeled sources describe a significant range, but the average is consistently described as well above human scale. Some descriptions go as high as several meters in height, and at the very outer edge of the material, there are claims of individuals reaching close to 10 meters. To put that in context, a basketball hoop is 3 meters off the ground. A double-decker bus is about 4.5 meters tall. So even at the more moderate end of these descriptions, we are talking about beings who would find every structure on Earth uncomfortably small. The 10-meter figure is unusual even by channeling standards, and most sources land somewhere between 3 and 5 meters as a more typical blue Sirian height. But it is there in the material and worth naming. Their skin is described as a deep, rich blue, which gives them their name. Their features are humanoid but refined, with large eyes, high foreheads, and a physical presence that channelers and contactees consistently describe as calm and luminous. There is a quality of stillness about them that apparently communicates wisdom before a single word or thought is exchanged. Their lifespan is described as extraordinary. Some sources say thousands of years. Others are less specific, but consistently indicate that blue Sirians experience time very differently from humans, with individual lives that stretch across what would be many human generations. When you live for thousands of years, your relationship with history, with learning, and with patience must be almost incomprehensible from a human perspective. Culturally, the blue Sirians are described as the intellectuals and artists of the Sirian family. They are associated with music and science in a very integrated way. In their civilization, these two things are not separate. The mathematical structures underlying music are not just an interesting observation for them. Those structures are understood as fundamental to how reality itself is organized. Their science is essentially the study of frequency, harmony, and the geometric principles that govern consciousness and matter. This is worth holding in mind alongside what multiple channeling traditions say about the Sirian connection to ancient human civilizations. In the raw material, one of the most respected bodies of channeled work, delivered through Carla Ruckert in the early 1980s, there is a discussion of extraterrestrial groups who attempted to share philosophical and scientific knowledge with ancient Egypt, with some of that effort connected to Sirian influence. The channeler Bashar, delivered through Daryl Anka since the 1980s, also references Sirian involvement in the deep history of Earth's development, and it is Bashar's cosmological framework that generates much of the contact sequence we will be discussing in the final section of this video. Patricia Corey, who channels what she calls the Sirian High Council, has produced one of the most extensive bodies of Sirian-specific material available, covering multiple books, including No More Secrets, No More Lies, and Before We Leave You. Her material consistently frames the blue-type Sirian beings as holders of what she calls the Akashic Record, the accumulated knowledge of civilizations across vast stretches of galactic history. In her transmissions, the Sirian High Council functions as something like a library and a guidance council combined, preserving knowledge through cycles of cosmic change that make individual civilizations rise and fall like waves. One of the most important cultural traits the sources describe for the blue Sirians is their relationship with emotion and intellect. In many channeling traditions, highly advanced beings are portrayed as having moved past emotion into a kind of cool, pure logic. The blue Sirians are specifically described as a civilization that chose the opposite path, integrating deep feeling with advanced intellect rather than transcending one for the other. Their ideal is what some sources call coherence, the state where what you think, what you feel, and what you do are all in complete alignment. They have been working toward that as a civilization for a very long time. and they consider helping younger civilizations find that same coherence to be one of their most important missions. Their communication, like that of the aquatic Sirians, is primarily telepathic. But the blue Sirians also have a rich tradition of what might be called tonal communication, the use of specific frequencies of sound to convey information, emotion, and intention simultaneously. Some sources suggest this is part of why the Sirian frequency has historically shown up in human cultures through music, through mantras, and through the use of sound in sacred ritual. The resonance was not accidental. The blue Sirians are positioned in the channeled literature as operating primarily at what is called the fifth dimension, depending on which tradition or framework is being used. This is a shorthand used across many traditions for a state of consciousness that has largely moved beyond separation and fear as its default operating mode. At that level, the physical body as we know it is not the primary vehicle. Interaction with beings at this level is more often experienced as a felt presence, an inner knowing, or a visual impression during meditation or dream time, rather than a solid physical encounter. This is actually one of the reasons some contact researchers suggest that the blue Sirians, despite being one of the most talked about Sirian groups, may not be among the very first to appear in what the contact community calls open contact, the moment when extraterrestrial beings make themselves publicly known on Earth. We will come back to that at the end of the video. Now, before we go on to the feline Sirians, let's discuss the differences between density and dimension, as it can be confusing to people new to channeled material. Dimension and density are not the same thing. You will notice that in a lot of alien and contact content, the phrases fifth dimension and fifth density, for example, get used as if they mean the same thing. They do not, and it is worth taking a moment to explain why, because once you understand the difference, you will start noticing the confusion everywhere. The word density comes primarily from the raw material, a body of channeled work delivered through Carla Ruckert in the early 1980s. In that framework, density is a measure of how much light and consciousness a being has integrated over its entire evolutionary journey. It is about what a being fundamentally is at the level of its awareness, not where it lives or what planes it can access. The scale runs from first density, which is basic matter and elements, through to seventh density, which is described as the threshold of reunification with the source of all things. Second density is where plants and animals reside, growth without full awareness. Third density is where humanity currently sits. We are self-aware beings capable of polarity of choice. Fourth density is the state of love and understanding as the primary orientation. Fifth density is specifically about wisdom, the mastery of knowledge and light. Sixth density is where love and wisdom are fully unified together. This is a very precise and internally consistent system, and the channeled material of Bashar, delivered through Darryl Anka, broadly aligns with it. The word dimension comes from a different tradition. In the Letters from Sirius material and in Patricia Corey's Sirian High Council transmissions, dimension refers more to a layer or band of reality, a vibrational frequency range within which beings can exist and operate. It is a more spatial and perceptual idea than the raw density concept. A being might reside primarily in one dimension while being able to reach or interact with others. Here is where the confusion enters. In popular usage, and using the fifth dimension as an example, the fifth dimension tends to be described in ways that correspond roughly to what the raw material would call fourth density, the state of love, unity, and expanded awareness. The numbering does not match between the two systems. So when a source from one tradition says fifth density, and a source from another tradition says fifth dimension, they may be pointing toward a similar general level of development, but they are using different maps with different scales. The practical result is that a lot of secondary writing and online content treats the two phrases as interchangeable, picking up the word fifth from both traditions and assuming it refers to the same thing. It does not, though sometimes it may not be possible to know which is correct. A shortcut could be to just remember that there are an infinite number of dimensions, but only 7 densities, which is probably why dimension is used more often. Please feel free to discuss the density level and dimensional position of your favorite channeled entities in the comments with others, as it will help anyone new to this material. Let's now discuss the next Sirian race. Part 3. The feline Sirians. We are now meeting what many people consider the most mythologically significant of the 4 Sirian groups. And once you hear the description, you will immediately recognize why. The feline Sirians are humanoid beings with distinctly cat-like features, not in the sense of being covered in fur or walking on 4 legs. Like the other Sirian groups, they are fundamentally upright, 2-legged, 2-armed beings, but their facial structure is clearly feline, with wide-set large eyes, flatter noses, and a physical presence that sources describe as carrying an unmistakable quality of regal, composed authority. They are tall and strongly built. Their coloring varies across different lineages within the group, from golden and amber tones to deeper, rich browns, and their eyes are described as extraordinary, large and luminous, with the vertical pupil structure of earth cats. When you hear that description, something probably clicks immediately, because feline-faced divine beings appear in ancient Egyptian art with striking regularity. The goddess Bastet, typically depicted with the head of a cat. The fierce warrior goddess Sekhmet, with a lioness head. Mafdet, one of the oldest deities in the Egyptian record, associated with justice and depicted as a cat or cheetah. The Great Sphinx, with its leonine body. The channeled material does not treat this as coincidence. In the Letters from Sirius material and in Patricia Corey's work, the feline-featured gods of ancient Egypt are described as cultural memories of actual contact with feline Sirian beings. The idea is that when the feline Sirians were present on or near Earth in the ancient past, human beings who encountered them translated that experience into religious imagery. The beings they met with cat-like faces became the cat-headed gods of their mythology. There is even a detail in some of the sources that goes one step further. Earth cats, the domestic cats that humans have kept as companions for thousands of years, are described in some Sirian channeling material as having been specifically guided or genetically assisted as a kind of living reminder of the feline Sirian lineage. A calling card left behind in the physical world. Whether you find that idea beautiful or strange, it is worth noting that the human and cat relationship is genuinely unusual compared to the relationship between humans and any other domesticated animal, with cats having maintained a striking degree of independence and mystery throughout their entire history alongside us. In terms of their culture and role, the feline Sirians are consistently described as leaders. Within the broader Sirian family, they occupy something like a governance role. They are the decision-makers, the ones who hold the long view and make choices about how the Sirian collective engages with other civilizations. Their nature is described as deeply courageous, intensely loyal to those they have committed to protecting, and capable of a kind of fierce compassion that does not look like gentleness from the outside, but is, according to the sources, rooted in profound care. Sound healing is specifically associated with the feline Sirians, and this is worth dwelling on for a moment. Multiple sources describe them as masters of working with frequency and vibration in ways that directly affect the physical and energetic body. Not music as an aesthetic experience, but sound as a precise tool for changing the state of matter and consciousness. This is described as a science in their civilization, one they have used both in their own healing traditions and in their interactions with other species. Their connection to Earth is described as particularly heartfelt. Among the 4 Sirian groups, the feline Sirians are the ones most often described as having made a specific commitment to Earth and to humanity, a kind of guardian covenant. The language in several sources is not that of neutral observers or distant helpers. It is the language of beings who feel responsible, personally and collectively, for what happens here. This connects to a broader theme in Sirian channeling that we should pause on briefly. The idea that Sirian history with Earth has not always been straightforward. Some sources, including the Lissa royal transcripts, describe a period in the very distant past when Sirian groups were involved in Earth's development in ways that were not entirely in humanity's best interest, a kind of paternalistic interference motivated by a desire to help but without full respect for human free will. The feline Sirians' strong commitment to Earth is sometimes framed as part of a long process of making amends for that history, of choosing now to be genuine allies rather than managers. That sense of responsibility is very much in keeping with the feline archetype that runs through so much of human culture. The guardian who does not make noise about being a guardian. The protector who is simply present, watching, ready. Part 4. The reptilian-appearing Sirians. The 4th group is, without question, the one most likely to make someone do a double-take when they first hear about it, because these beings are described as having a distinctly reptilian appearance. And in many areas of the alien research community, anything reptilian is immediately associated with deception, control, and harmful intent. So let us be clear about what the channeled sources actually say and why context makes all the difference here. The reptilian-appearing Sirians are humanoid beings, like the other 3 groups, fully bipedal, similar basic body plan, but their skin has the texture and appearance of scales. Their facial features carry reptilian characteristics, with wide, flat noses, heavy brow ridges, and eyes described as amber to golden in color, with horizontal or slit pupils. They are physically the most robust of the 4 Sirian groups, described as very strongly built and dense in their physical form. In terms of height, they fall in a similar range to the feline Sirians, consistently described as taller than average humans, but not reaching the extraordinary heights attributed to the blue Sirians. Now, here is the crucial piece of information that the sources emphasize strongly. This reptilian appearance is not a reflection of their nature. It is an adaptation. The narrative in the Letters from Sirius material explains that the environment near Sirius A, in the region of space where this group developed, is described as having higher levels of radiation and energetic intensity than the environment closer to where the aquatic Sirians evolved. Over a very long period of time, a scale-like skin covering developed as a natural protective adaptation to that environment. Their character and culture, as described in the channeled material, are completely at odds with the fear-based reptilian stereotype. The reptilian-appearing Sirians are specifically associated with medicine and healing. They are the physicians of the Sirian family, deeply knowledgeable about biology, about how physical bodies work, and about the relationship between physical health and the broader energy field of a being. Their temperament is described as grounded and methodical. Where the blue Sirians are the philosophers and the feline Sirians are the leaders, the reptilian-appearing Sirians are the scientists and healers. They are precise in their thinking, systematic in their approach, and deeply committed to the practical application of knowledge for the benefit of living beings. They are the ones you would want present if someone was hurt. Within the Sirian family structure, they play an important balancing role. The sources describe the Sirian groups as being engaged in their own long-term hybridization process with each other, gradually merging their different lineages into what is called the hybrid Ashkeru, a unified Sirian people who carry the traits and gifts of all four groups. The reptilian-appearing Sirians' contribution to that merged future is described as the grounding force, the practical wisdom, the capacity to translate high-frequency ideas into physical reality. Their connection to Earth is specifically through the healing arts. Several sources describe them as having been involved in what we might call biological stewardship of Earth at various points, maintaining the health of ecosystems and contributing to the physical development of life here in ways that are not well preserved in any surviving ancient record. Their presence is quieter and more technical than that of the mythology-generating feline Sirians, but the sources suggest their work has been no less significant. The strong message the Sirian channeling material sends about this group is essentially a lesson in not judging by appearance. In human culture, and in a lot of popular alien theory, the reptilian appearance has become a shorthand for threat. The sources presenting the reptilian-appearing Sirians are quite deliberate in challenging that assumption, making the point that physical form and moral nature are not the same thing, and that a being who looks frightening by human standards may be one of the most genuinely compassionate and helpful presences in the galaxy. What they all share: Sirian culture and the bigger mission. Now that we have met all four groups, we can step back and look at what holds them together as a family. Because despite their very different appearances and specializations, the channeled sources describe a set of values and beliefs that run through all four Sirian groups like a common thread. The central value is integration. In Sirian cosmology and culture, the deepest works a civilization can do is to bring together things that appear to be opposites: light and shadow, intellect and feeling, individual and community, physical and non-physical. The Sirian symbol system, as described in some of the letters from Sirius material, is built around this principle of polarity integration. Their civilizational project, across all four groups, is to find wholeness by moving through division rather than by choosing one side over another. This shows up in their approach to other civilizations as well. The Sirians are not described as beings who want to tell you what to do. Across all four groups, the channeled material consistently highlights what could be called an anti-savior ethic. They are specifically not interested in being worshipped, in being placed above humanity, or in taking over the management of Earth's future. In fact, some sources describe the opposite desire quite strongly: a genuine discomfort when humans treat them as gods or as all-knowing authorities. Patricia Corey's material from the Sirian High Council is particularly direct on this point. The Sirian High Council, in her transmissions, repeatedly emphasizes that their role is to offer perspective and information, not to make decisions for humanity. They want contact between equals, not a relationship where one side is dependent on the other. This connects to another key value, what the sources call empowerment. The Sirian mission with humanity, as described across multiple channeling traditions, is not to fix humanity. It is to help humanity develop the capacity to fix itself. The knowledge they share, whether through direct transmission, through channeling, or through the more subtle influence of cetacean consciousness in Earth's oceans, is always oriented toward helping humans become more fully what they already have the potential to be. There is also a strong collective governance structure described across the Sirian groups. The idea of the Sirian High Council, or in some sources the Sirian Tribunal Council, appears repeatedly. This is described as a body that operates across dimensions and across the four lineages, coordinating their interactions with other civilizations and making collective decisions about how and when to engage more openly with worlds like Earth. The language used is a blend of what we might call spiritual and administrative, councils and oversight bodies, but with ethics at the center rather than bureaucracy. One detail worth noting is that the Sirian relationship with time is described as very different from ours. For beings operating at higher dimensions, particularly the blue Sirians and the aspects of the Sirian High Council that Patricia Corey channels, linear time is not the primary framework. They can perceive across what we would call past and future in ways that make prediction and planning function very differently than it does for us. This is offered not as a claim of omniscience, but as an explanation for why their guidance sometimes sounds prophetic, and also why it can sometimes feel vague or conditional. They are not describing a fixed timeline. They are describing what they can perceive in the probability fields around human collective choices. The stars and the history. We have been talking about the Sirians entirely in terms of who they are and what they do. It is worth taking a short moment to look at the stars that give them their name, just to ground the whole picture in something you can look up in the actual sky. Sirius is the brightest star visible from Earth at night. If you are in the northern hemisphere in winter, you can find the belt of Orion and then follow it down and to the left. And there it is, blazing white-blue, unmistakable. In Australia, you can see it beautifully from autumn through winter. It sits in the constellation Canis Major, the Great Dog, which is why it is also called the Dog Star. Astronomers have established that Sirius is actually a binary system, two stars orbiting each other. Sirius A is the bright one we see, a main sequence star about twice the mass of our Sun and around 25 times more luminous. Sirius B is a white dwarf, the compressed remnant of a star that has already ended its life, much smaller and much fainter. Interestingly, it is actually one of the most luminous white dwarfs known to science. The two orbit each other with a period of roughly 50 years, and the system is only about 8.5 light-years away, making it one of our closest stellar neighbors. No planets have been confirmed around Sirius to date, though searches have been conducted. The cultural history of Sirius on Earth is remarkable and completely real, separate from any claims about extraterrestrial contact. In ancient Egypt, the rising of Sirius on the horizon just before dawn each year marked the beginning of the Nile flood and the start of the Egyptian calendar year. The goddess Sopdet, later merged with Isis, personified Sirius. The star had calendrical, religious, and agricultural significance, woven together in a way that made it genuinely central to Egyptian civilization. The Great Pyramid at Giza, which the channeled material often brings up in relation to Syrian influence, is conventionally attributed to the pharaoh Khufu and was completed around 2560 BCE, placing it in the late 26th century BCE. That is a meaningful precision. Some popular summaries place it in the 25th century BCE, but the mainstream Egyptological dating puts it roughly 100 years earlier than that. The most famous story in the modern contact research community involving Sirius is the Dogon case. The Dogon are a people from Mali in West Africa, whose mythology includes detailed descriptions of a companion to Sirius called Potolo, now identified with Sirius B. French ethnographers Marcel Griol and Germaine Dieterlen documented this knowledge in fieldwork conducted in the 1930s through 1950s. When their findings reached a broader audience, they attracted enormous attention. Robert Temple's 1976 book, The Sirius Mystery, took the material to a popular audience and argued that the Dogon's astronomical knowledge could only have come from contact with beings from the Sirius system. The Dogon mythology of the Nomo, fish-like ancestral spirits associated with Sirius, fits neatly with the aquatic Sirian descriptions we explored in Part 1. It is worth knowing that these claims have been seriously challenged by later researchers. The anthropologist Walter Van Beek conducted a restudy of the Dogon in the field and reported that the widespread knowledge of Sirius as a double star described by Griol was very hard to find in the community, and that the original ethnography may have been shaped by the interaction between the researchers and their informants in ways that inflated the astronomical claims. The debate remains open. The esoteric traditions hold the Dogon case as significant regardless, and for anyone wanting to go deeper into this particular rabbit hole, Robert Temple's book is the starting point, and Van Beek's restudy is the important counterweight. Sirius is also significant in the astronomical traditions of indigenous Australian peoples. In Burong star lore recorded through Melbourne's Museum Victoria, Sirius carries an association with a female crow figure, the spouse of Canopus, which is the second brightest star in the night sky. Pacific navigators also used Sirius among the stars guiding ocean voyaging. The point is simply that for many different peoples across Earth's history, this star has been a consistent and meaningful presence in the sky long before the word extraterrestrial was ever used. The final question: will the Sirians be there at first contact? This brings us to the question that connects the Sirians to the biggest conversation happening right now in the contact research and channeling community. The question of first open contact, when it happens, who goes first, and where in the sequence the Sirians might appear. Before we get into the specifics, it is worth understanding the framework that generates this question. The most detailed and internally consistent contact sequence that exists in the channeling literature comes from the Bashar material, channeled by Daryl Anka, who has been receiving these transmissions since the 1980s. Bashar is described as a being from the Essassani civilization, a hybrid species that evolved from human and Zeta Reticuli genetics and now exists as a stable civilization several hundred years in Earth's future. In Bashar's framework, open contact between humanity and extraterrestrial civilizations is described as a graduated process. The first groups to make open contact will be those whose frequency and form are least dissonant with where humanity currently is. The idea is that you do not want to shock a civilization into a fear response by introducing something too far outside its existing frame of reference. You start close and work outward. In this framework, the Pleiadians are often named as the first because they are the most genetically and visually similar to humans. Some channeling traditions even describe the Pleiadians as a kind of elder human branch, a civilization that shares our basic blueprint and our deep history. The Yahyel, also called the Shalanaya, come next. They are described as a hybrid civilization carrying human genetics alongside Zeta genetics, making them familiar enough to not be completely disorienting, but clearly non-human enough to begin expanding humanity's sense of what intelligent life can look like. The Essassani, Bashar's own people, are positioned as the third group, further along the spectrum of hybridization and further along in terms of the density level at which they primarily operate. So who is fourth? The Sirian case for fourth position is genuinely strong within this framework, and several of the sources we have drawn from today support it in specific ways. The first reason is the Sirian anti-savior ethic. The Sirian sources consistently say that they prefer to make contact when humanity is ready to meet them as equals rather than as gods. That condition is not met in the earliest stages of open contact, when the simple fact of ET presence will be enough for most people to manage. But by a fourth contact stage, when the initial encounters with the Pleiadians, the Yahyel, and the Essassani have had time to settle into collective consciousness, the Sirians' preferred conditions of psychological readiness are closer to being met. The second reason is the Sirian relationship with the concept of disclosure itself. A 2026 post from the Letters from Sirius material, one of the most current sources available, describes the Sirian perspective on disclosure as a gradual calibration rather than a single event. They are specifically not pushing for a dramatic arrival. Their timeline is conditional on collective human readiness, and they frame their own appearance as something that happens naturally once a threshold of human stability and openness is reached. The third reason is the multi-lineage complexity of the Sirian family. Remember, we are not talking about one type of being. We are talking about 4 distinct groups with very different appearances and very different roles. That complexity would be a lot to introduce in the first wave of contact. By the fourth stage, when humanity has already had experience of beings who look human but are not quite, beings who are clearly alien but manageable in their difference, the Sirian family's full range of forms becomes something humanity is more prepared to receive. The oceanic pathway also matters here. Multiple Sirian sources describe early contact preparation as happening through water, through cetacean communication, and through dreamtime interaction, rather than through dramatic arrivals. If dolphins and whales are already functioning as quiet Sirian ambassadors in Earth's oceans, as several sources claim, then the Sirian contact that follows is less a cold introduction and more a formal meeting with beings humanity has already been gradually preparing to know. Now, is the case closed? Absolutely not. Other groups have strong arguments for that fourth position too. The Arcturians are probably the most compelling alternative, and they will be the subject of our next video. In multiple traditions, including the famous readings of Edgar Cayce, the widely respected early 20th century American psychic, Arcturus is described as the highest civilization in our galaxy. Cayce described it as a waypoint for souls between lifetimes. The channeled Arcturian material, particularly the work of Norma Milanovic, whose book, We the Arcturians, has been widely read since 1990, and more recently the Arcturian group material channeled by Marilyn Raphael, presents beings of extraordinary spiritual development, deeply committed to humanity's evolution. The Arcturian case for fourth contact is built on a different logic than the Sirian case, where the Sirians would represent a deepening of the meet your ancient family theme established by the Pleiadians, and Yahyel, the Arcturians would represent something different. Not family, but something more like a wise elder civilization whose relationship to humanity is that of a master healer to a patient who is finally well enough to listen. The main challenge with the Arcturians as fourth is that most of their channeled material describes them as preferring to work at the level of energy and consciousness rather than through physical presence. They operate primarily at what the traditions call the sixth or seventh dimension, well beyond the range where physical ships and physical landings are the natural mode. That does not disqualify them from contact, but it might place them further along the sequence, at a point when human consciousness has expanded enough to interface with them on their preferred terms, rather than needing the more physically grounded type of contact described for the earlier groups. The Andromedans are another name that comes up in this conversation, particularly through the researcher Alex Collier, who has described ongoing contact with Andromedan beings since the early 1990s. In his material, the Andromedans play something like a diplomatic coordination role, helping to manage the relationship between various ET groups and Earth. If the fourth contact is meant to open a formal diplomatic phase, rather than a personal or familial one, the Andromedans could step into that role. However, for those who are still getting used to extraterrestrials from nearby star systems, the idea of a group from a completely different galaxy being the fourth might seem a bit strange, and it may be necessary to emphasize the neutral, unbiased mediator position that a race that doesn't live in our Milky Way galaxy would bring to the table. So where does this leave us? If you are mapping this out as a logical progression, the Sirians are probably the strongest candidate for a fourth formal open contact group. With their combination of historical relationship with Earth, graduated readiness for contact, multilineage family structure, and conditional ethics around when and how they engage. But the Arcturians are genuinely close, particularly if the fourth contact represents something qualitatively different, a shift from meeting your cosmic relatives into something more like formal recognition by the galactic community. Either way, both groups are deeply embedded in the contact literature. And it is worth noting that several Sirian channeling sources from 2025 and 2026 have specifically described the next few years as an acceleration point, where more and more channeled connections with ET groups will come through as what they call soul contracts between human receivers and their ET counterparts become active. The picture is moving and changing in real time. Now we come to the end of this video documentary on the Sirians. To summarize, 4 races under one star. The aquatic Sirians, guardians of Earth's waters and kin to the cetaceans. The blue Sirians, philosophers and keepers of galactic knowledge operating across vast stretches of time. The feline Sirians, leaders and protectors with deep ties to Earth's ancient mythology. And the reptilian-appearing Sirians, healers and scientists whose appearance tells you almost nothing about their actual nature. Together, these 4 groups form one of the richest and most internally detailed bodies of material in all of the extraterrestrial channeling literature. And they are, by multiple accounts, among the groups who will play a significant role in whatever comes next for humanity's relationship with the wider community of intelligent life. In our next video, we are going to turn our attention to the Arcturians. We touched on them today as a possible 4th contact group, but their story is remarkable enough to deserve the full picture. Who are they? What do they look like? What do they want? And why does so much of the contact literature treat them as the most spiritually advanced civilization in the galaxy. We will get into all of that next time. If you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Thank you for watching.